She's whole. She's whole again. Yep.
Yep. Okay, and we are almost live. It's loading, and we are good. Okay, so just want to welcome you all tonight to our second episode of Door of Return. This is a video series put out by the Episcopal Church, presiding Bishop Michael Curry's pilgrimage to Ghana. And so he's reflecting again, each episode is a different reflection from a different person who was on that pilgrimage. And it kind of shows a little bit about not only just going to Ghana, but what was the church's role during the transatlantic slave trade. And so that's kind of what we're going to be exploring that and looking at that kind of from a spiritual level. So what we'll do is I'll start us off with a prayer, and then we will go into the movie. I will have you all muted during the movie, and then we will then we'll come back, and Stephen and I will facilitate a conversation with you. Does this sound good?
Okay.
All right. This prayer that I'm going to do today, you're going to you're going to hear on Sunday. It was something proposed by our anti-racism committee and work with our liturgy committee. So instead of doing the general confession this Sunday, we're going to do this, what we call the anti-racism confession. So I'm going to read that, and you'll also get to hear this on Sunday. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, who created and loves all people, we come before you today confessing the sin of racism in our country, our church, and in ourselves. Forgive us for our part in it, for the ways we have contributed to the impression of others, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Help us to face injustice in our institutions as well as prejudice in ourselves. Help us to see the reality of racism and bigotry wherever it exists, and to have the courage to challenge it. Through your Holy Spirit, may we receive the grace and power to change within ourselves, and also to join with others to do the work of love and justice in the world, to move toward the goal of bringing an end to racism. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who came for all people. Amen.
Amen.
All right, and just give me a second to load the video, and we will be all set.
Slavery is the most evil form of turning people into objects. Every Episcopal church that dates back to that era, and all of us, by our connection with it, have some blood on our hands. At least in the sense that if we don't understand it, we can't change what we're doing. We will continue to objectify people in our daily lives. I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. Mid-1961, we moved there 3 weeks after the Freedom Riders got beat up. But I remember going to the airport in Montgomery and going to the wrong fountain and being told, no, 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 you go over here. It was very dissonant, even at age 8. I grew up friends of some of the children of the white players in Montgomery who were actually the antagonists to the civil rights movement. In a very real way, I had like a 10th row seat to what was going on. I remember all the state troopers driving out of town to go to Selma before the march. The sort of neighborhood bullies, they had their guns in their front window just in case the marchers came back down our street and started causing trouble. So the whole town was on edge, and I remember that really clearly. But I also remember being on hot sidewalks and seeing African Americans walk to the other side. They had to make way for white people. That's what Jim Crow was all about. Make way for white people. It was a time for a child of feeling everything's topsy-turvy. And I knew it was wrong, but I was there watching it. And with kids whose families were very much involved in negative ways. I come from a family that has been in this country for a very long time. Many generations of Virginia, South Carolina, Mississippi slaveholders, probably 24 Confederate officers. Most of that I've discovered because my parents didn't talk about our Confederate history much. I'm not even sure they really knew much about it. Growing up in the tensions of the civil rights battles going on in Montgomery, even though I felt an inner dissonance, I participated in some of that. And it was when I became the family genealogist that I began to discover just how deep our family's involvement in enslaving people was. Plantations in Virginia, plantations in southern Mississippi. I think my great-great-great-grandfather went to church with Jefferson Davis. Episcopal church, mind you. I simply began to realize that if I was going to be faithful to God's call to me as a reconciler, that I couldn't let that history just lie there. I had to be somebody who was going to be finding ways to heal, to repair, to reconnect. I felt pretty much silenced and numbed as we've gone through these castles and through the Pecora slave camp. I don't know that I have the resources within me to respond adequately to that kind of suffering. And the Anglican Church in Ghana is across the street from here. When you see how many hundreds of thousands, millions of people came through these places and sat in those dungeons, and then to come and to meet whips, to have your name taken from you, I can only be certain that my ancestors did that to people. So I have to shift course. I've got work to do. Some of it is channeling the pain that I feel in seeing this, the knowledge of my family's complicity, the reality of children in my world never having their gifts raised up. My inner sense of urgency to be about that conversation has just filled me in this place. I don't see the work of racial reconciliation as in any way separate from my call to the priesthood. I think that sometimes the conversation our church has had about race has been part of our way of processing the shame that we feel, the blame that we want to assign, and really hasn't brought us to the point yet of going deeper into the kind of personal conversations that really begin to convert us to a new way of thinking and change our hearts toward one another. There's a part of me that thinks we need to get past just talking about race, about justice. We need to live it. We need to bring our lives so deeply into that conversation that the objectification that slavery is the ultimate expression of is replaced by a complete I-thou relationship. I'm in relationship with you because you're created in the image of God. That's holy. You have gifts that God has given you that I've been blind to. The readiness for the conversation and the readiness of the church for that conversation, I think, starts with a good look in the mirror. Am I ready to tell my story that's painful, that's hopeful? Am I ready to hear your story that's painful, that's hopeful? I'm ready. I'm ready to do that work.
All right, welcome back. What were some general thoughts y'all had about the video?
Wow.
I go back to growing up in a all white middle class neighborhood. I mean, I don't even know how old I was when I realized there were Black people. Probably quite young, but there was no discussion on it. I don't know. You'd watch movies and there'd be Black people in there. You'd see movies about slavery. You'd see plantations and Gone with the Wind and all that stuff. And it seemed like it was so far removed that I didn't grasp what had really happened and how awful it was until I got a little older, and then you'd see people being picked on, you know, how kids can be, you know, bullied and all that kind of stuff. And then all of that just kind of came together as every single person is just a person. And, you know, they have blonde hair, blue eyes, dark hair, no hair. I mean, it doesn't matter. We're all just people. And how can one person be cruel to another one is something that I've never been able to. Man's inhumanity to man is my biggest pet peeve. And in any shape or form, it doesn't matter. So I don't have, I mean, my ancestry goes back to Germany. It doesn't go to plantations and stuff. So I don't have that in my thinking. But it's just anytime I see any injustice to another human being, I can't stand it. I don't know. So when I saw the marching with Martin Luther King and all that, I mean, that was great. It wasn't something that I was involved in or any of my family or friends were. That was happening far away. So I don't have any firsthand experience with any of that. And obviously, as I grew older and started working, and I was working with all kinds of people and all colors, and always got along with everybody. I never had any issues. I never really saw much. The only thing I can say is that one of my good friends who was Black, I would watch how she behaved differently depending on what group we were in.
Mm.
And I didn't understand it, and then when I started to understand it, I just thought that's sad that has to be. But that's how she survived. Trying to raise a son and a daughter, and scared to death. Her son is in college now. But you know, she told me all about the talk and all that stuff, and I can't understand it. It just makes no sense.
Where did you grow up?
In Park Ridge, Illinois.
Oh, okay. Okay. But you're not originally a West Coast person.
No, I've been out here 20 years now, but yeah, no.
So I have a question, John. This might be a bit off the topic, but did everyone watch all 3 videos, or did we only watch the one together?
I think it's just the one together, unless
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
John and I have a bit of an advantage because we've seen all 3. So
I did watch the one from last week.
you did.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I watched the recording.
Okay, I haven't seen the recording, but there was something we were supposed to watch before the first one. I saw that.
Okay, that's the one.
That's it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they seen what we've done for the past 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, I guess my comment on this fellow, Mr. Waldo, is that he's in Virginia. They call them FFV, First Family of Virginia, and they actually have genealogies and books and lots of record keeping about who's who and the pecking order of the state of Virginia. So he seems like he's kind of coming from establishment roots, and I mean, he seems quite earnest, but I would say that having seen this video now a couple times, it's telling for not only what he says, but what he doesn't say.
Yeah. Well, let's go into a little bit about what he talks about. So in his reminiscences, about growing up in Alabama during the civil rights movement, close to people who were in opposition to it, he sums up the essence of the Jim Crow as being the message, make way for white people. So in thinking about that phrase and how he captures it, what have you witnessed or experienced in your life, whether past or present? What examples come to mind?
Well, I can say I grew up in Piedmont, and when I grew up in Piedmont, it said, well, everyone was white. On the deeds, it said you cannot sell the house to a black person. And when I was in the 7th grade, someone did. And we had a family move in, and one was in the 7th grade with me, and he had a brother in the 11th grade. And what I saw was, well, at least from my eyes, that there was no difference. Now that's what I saw. I can't speak for everyone else at the school, but it made no difference to me. I knew I had plenty of friends that were Chinese, and I knew what a black person looked like. So, and my father hung out with quite a few African Americans. So, and then I got involved just like a lot of people here. You know, I was lucky enough to leave the School of Piedmont to go to college prep, and it was the 60s. It was fantastic. I hung out on Telegraph Avenue all the time with anyone of any race, of, you know, Mario Savio. Oh, hi, my name's Ken Fuller. How are you today? I met so many people, and that was my awakening.
I was kind of shocked. This had to be in the early 70s. My mother-in-law lived in a suburb of Chicago, in an all-white neighborhood, and she was selling her house, and she sold it to a Chinese family, and the whole neighborhood got upset.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, "What? Why?" I mean, we just didn't understand it. My 2 sons would go to school, and there weren't any. it was all white, but there were bullies. So that was what they had to deal with. And you know, how you try to teach them that nobody's better than you and you're not better than anybody else, and stick up for the underdog, and if somebody's getting picked on, go and step up, you know, stop it. And that's just, I don't know, that's just kind of how we were. It wasn't until we were all still, my two sons were grown by the time that we had all of the nonsense in Chicago with Cabrini Green and all that stuff. But that was, all of the people I knew, the thinking there was, it makes sense. They're in the middle of Chicago. They don't have, the parents are, you know, the dads aren't around. They don't have jobs. They can't get jobs. They can't go to school. They get picked on all the time. It's no wonder that that's what's happening. It wasn't, you know, they're doing it on purpose for no reason. We understood it, but, and they tried to fix it, but one of the ways they tried to fix it was they kept it really quiet. And we lived way out in the suburbs, and they had a bunch of apartment buildings that were low income, and they kept emptying them. And then they were trying to get the gangs from the south side of Chicago, and they transplanted them out into the suburbs, thinking that then they'd have a chance and they would, you know, become like everybody else. Well, that didn't work, because all they did was start gangs out in the suburbs. And it was crazy, because when my two boys were in high school, we lived in that neighborhood. I didn't see very many black kids, but the gangs were there. And my son said to me one time, he says, "Mom, you don't understand. Within a 3-block radio of the house we're living in right now, I can buy a gun illegally. I can get any kind of drug I want. I can order a hit on somebody." He says, "That's what's out here, and it's just quiet, and everybody, they don't talk about it. It's not happening. You guys don't know." And that was kind of eye-opening. But again, it was, you know, how did that happen? If you have to fight for your next meal or for whatever, I mean, you know, so I don't know.
I grew up, of course, you know, right in Oakland here, right there in Chinatown. So I lived in the ghetto of Oakland's Chinatown, and we knew we could not buy property outside of Chinatown. It just wasn't going to happen. I was going to ask Ken, when this house was first sold to the Black family, were there people upset in Piedmont?
Oh, there were some people upset, I'm sure. I mean, I didn't hear a lot about it. I mean, I was only 11 years old. So, but I mean, from with the kids loved these two kids because they were athletes. They were runners. No, they were, and they were very light skinned, I will also say. But no, they were very well liked in the school. So the parents, I don't know. I know that there was like a big thing in the article in the Piedmonter about this whole thing. I mean, they printed it right in the Piedmonter about this being sold to this family. And I don't know if they tried to get a lawsuit or what, but it all went away because the family seemed to be very nice. And but it was just, no. I read somewhere else though that this would have been 1959, 1960 when this happened. I read someplace though that there was earlier another time in the 20s or 30s that a Black family bought a house in Piedmont, and it was terrible. I mean, I guess they basically were almost chased out of town. I read that somewhere recently, but I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I shared with my small group that in 1967, when my family moved to a house near Grass Valley School, which is near the Chabot Golf Course, when we read the thing from the realtor, it said white and Oriental only, even in 1967. Now, in 1966, I returned to teaching, and in the in January of that year, there was a terrible flu epidemic in Oakland, and they were very short of teachers, even as subs. But, there were very few kids in school too, because everybody was down with the flu. So I had been staying at home, being a full-time homemaker, but my sister who was teaching said, "Oh, Fran, you've got to come back and sub for us. We're really desperate for subs." So I gathered all my material, submitted it to the schools, and so I was subbing in 1966, and I went to Charles P. Howard School, which was a newly built school up in the hills. It was on Fontaine Street, and I bumped into James Fornwalt, who was my principal when I left teaching to have children. And when Mr. Fornwalt saw me, he said, "Oh, when are you going to come back and teach for me?" And I said, "Well, I have a child going into kindergarten. So if you can find me a part-time job, just a half-time job, teaching one session a day, I'd be glad to come back and teach." And by golly, he found me a job teaching at Charles P. Howard School. And when I went to Charles P. Howard School, I was the half-time kindergarten teacher, so I didn't have the big kindergarten room complete with its own playground and a huge room. Alberta Svensson was the kindergarten teacher, the full-time kindergarten teacher, and I was across the hall from her in a regular primary classroom, which had no running water because it wasn't meant to be a kindergarten classroom. And I had to go to the custodian's closet and a bucket and get water every time I needed any water for any art projects. And Alberta Svensson, when December came and the children were performing in the Christmas program, my class did not get to perform. She was that uh, that obvious with her dislike for people of color. Well, I happened to have some children, some African American children in my classroom. She didn't have any in hers. And those parents went to the principal and they wanted to know after the program was over and done with why my class didn't get to perform. So the following year, Alberta Svensson had moved with her family out past the tunnel into the suburbs. And she, of course, was very upset when my family moved up to be her neighbor on Stacy Street. She left the neighborhood and she was very upset that my family had purchased a home there. But anyway, Howard Elementary School in the 8 years that I was there went from being 20% white, no, 20% black to only 20% white. There was white flight taking place in that neighborhood.
Mhm.
And because I was a person of color and I came into that school, I was equally not welcomed by the rest of the teachers. It was pretty tough teaching there for a while. But I was a person of color, and the white teachers didn't welcome me either. They didn't welcome the students, the families who moved in. So I just got, I was unwelcome along with the rest of them. It was pretty tough teaching there.
Hmm.
And that's recent history. That's, late 60s I stayed there for 8 years until the early 70s. So I've experienced a little racism.
Yeah. So in thinking about that, we're all conditioned, and our conditioning transcends our culture, region, even race. Most of us are prone to reflexive thoughts that reveal a kind of racial bias, or what they would call unconscious or implicit bias. When have you discovered a bias like this in yourself? In what situations? I know for me, sometimes my conservative Oklahoma culture kind of comes in, and I just don't think about it because it's just ingrained to the very level of when I was a kid. So sometimes I say things and I don't realize that's just there, not conscious about certain speech patterns I have, and how they can really rub things the wrong way in other cultures.
Mhm.
When you talk about culture, I mean, I think that's where I go, because I don't have, to me, it's personalities. And I don't care what you look like, I don't care where you're from, but if we can communicate and you're not mean to other people and blah, and you pull your weight and all that kind of stuff, everything's fine. But I was a manager at SAP, which is a giant corporation out of Germany, but I was managing the support for the technology folks, and we had people in every country. So I managed groups in Budapest and Sao Paulo in Brazil, and in Germany. There was a lot in Germany, and Japan, and all over the place. And it was funny because in order to do that, I started managing them, and I'm watching what's happening, and I'm going, okay, some of you are really contributing and some of you aren't. So I'd be like, okay, we got to dig into this. So I started digging into cultures, and I took this class, and I found it funny because what they were doing was saying, if you get all these people on a phone call, if you're from Brazil, you'll try to do all the talking. If you're from the US, you just want to run it. You want to manage it. If you're from Japan or China or Taiwan or something, you don't say anything. You just do what you're told.
Mhm.
If you're from Hungary, you're somewhere in the middle there. So then I had to, when I get all these people I had to teach them. I said, this is just culture, folks. This is how brains work, and there's nothing wrong with it, but you have to understand it.
Mhm.
And so, I had to keep squashing the guys from Brazil, saying, okay, let's let somebody else talk. I mean, it was just, but it was cultural. It wasn't the color. It was how you were taught, how you were raised. And it's still, it made a difference. But once we all got to know all of those things, and it worked out great. I mean, once everybody understood who they were and who everybody else was and how to communicate with them, it just cleaned up. But I have fun with that. I mean, because everybody's different, and you take each group, and within each group, you've got differences, because it's personality too. So I don't know. I love people, all people. I love to, how do they tick? What makes them go? How do they get where they were? All that kind of stuff. But managing a diverse group like that was interesting.
Mhm.
I would say that when deep conditioning is a word for unconscious, I grew up in Oakland. So Fran and Ken and I are kind of the local West Coasters. Judy grew up in Illinois. John, you spent time in Florida and Oklahoma. And I also had the opportunity to live in Charlottesville, Virginia for almost 4 years. So my experience there was that this stuff is so deep, and you see it. You can still visit plantations. I mean, this isn't an abstract thing where you have to use your imagination. Those things are there. So I guess the deep conditioning of someone from that part of the world is pretty deep. It's not, I'm not denying that bad things happened on the West Coast. Certainly, Fran, your experience supports that.
Mhm.
But it's a totally different mindset on the
Mhm.
East Coast. It's pretty
Absolutely.
entrenched. It's pretty much part of the way they live. So,
Like I said,
Yeah.
I grew up in the Chicago area. We moved to Wisconsin, in a little bitty tiny town. where my 3 kids were born, but we came from Chicago. We had a boat. We lived on a little lake that was off. We weren't right on the lake. We were one street over. So we had to tie the boat up to one of the trees. And we had a big chain and a padlock. And so after we were there for a while, for like a week or so, we were walking down to the boat and some of the neighbors came out and said, "Is that your boat?" We go, "Yeah." "You must be from Chicago or something. Why have you got it chained up? What is the matter with you?" You know? So then we got, it's like, "Oh, okay. We didn't know." But then then they were asking us, "What about Al Capone? And you got guns and all that?" I'm like, "No." And then after that, we moved to Arkansas, and we were moving to
Oh my.
Arkansas. All the people in Wisconsin are saying, "Well, you can throw all your shoes out because everybody down there is barefoot." I'm like, "What are you saying?"
Uh,
So yeah,
well, was it true? Did they go barefoot?
some of the ones up in the hills, yeah, because I worked
Maybe they
at
did.
that time I was an X-ray tech, and I worked for an orthopedic guy, and when they'd have to put a cast on an arm or a leg and then
Mhm.
send them home, and they'd come back in 6 weeks so you could take it off. You had to open all the windows, but they were all white.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was just the guy, people up in the hills, all kinds of different people
Yep.
everywhere.
So I want to go back to the movie or the
Mhm.
film. Waldo, he's very candid and sharing. He says, I felt pretty much silenced and numbed as we've gone through these castles and through the Picawaro slave camp. I don't know that I have resources within me to respond adequately to that kind of suffering. Feelings like this are common for people who, like Waldo, know themselves to be descendants of slaveholders, or who know themselves to be more broadly beneficiaries of the history of enslavement and the social construct of whiteness.
Mhm.
Have you ever felt similarly a numbness or an inadequate in the face of suffering? How have you reckoned with those feelings, and what, if anything, has helped you shift or move? For me, I'll just share. I'm one of those people. I am utterly lost in this conversation. Sometimes I don't know where to begin. I don't. I don't feel like I can. I can't be the expert. I can't be anything. And so for me, there's this painstaking thing in my heart that just makes me feel inadequate to be able to respond to this whole issue and trying to address it. It's mind numbing, and I just don't feel like I'm the right person for it.
I kind of feel the same way. I wasn't part of any of it. I don't have any of that direct knowledge. So I don't feel that I can speak authentically to anyone who has. I can't say anything. All I can say is I don't understand it. I don't know how it started. I don't know why it started. I don't know how somebody could do that. Like I said, man's inhumanity to man, no matter what it is. I don't get it. It's just wrong, and I don't understand. I don't know.
Yeah, and I can't say I feel numb, but I certainly feel very frustrated because, I mean, as a member of the Episcopal Church, we've been talking about anti-racism for ages, and we haven't made a lot of progress. I mean, Sunday morning, here we were, watching this wonderful video. Thank you, John, marching in the light of God. Yay, And I first sang that when I was at the World Council of Churches when we were meeting in Canberra in 1991. And when you talk about 1,000 people all assembled there, and we are talking about working on combating racism. We're talking about reconciliation. And I'm thinking, well, how far have we gotten since then? And then a year before 1991, 1990, that was the beginning of JPIC, Justice, Peace, and the Integrity of Creation. You know, recognizing people as human beings. I mean, and we've talked about that too. I mean, it's like this recent thing. I think I was watching the PB because the House of Bishops is having a Zoom experience, and so here is Jennifer Baskerville Burrows saying, she's numb because as an African American person, she's experienced it. She's experienced it through the Episcopal Church, as I have experienced through the Episcopal Church. And how far have we gone? So I'm hoping that, maybe with what's happened recently, we're finally going to get somewhere where people are not only made conscious of all the stuff that's been sort of swept under the rug. Yeah, we talk about it, but actions do speak louder than words. And when I saw the video about where the chapel is on top of where the slaves were enslaved, and I'm thinking, yeah, that is just like reality. The church is here, and we've just kind of swept all this stuff under the rug for all these years. So for me, I'm not numb. I'm just very frustrated because, I've been sorting things out during sheltering in place, and I've finally gotten to sorting out my box of stuff from the World Council of Churches, and I'm thumbing through and looking at all the stuff we talked about and all the discussions and everything, marching with the light of God. Well, we got to do more than march. There, I've said my piece.
I just want to say that song, by the way, is very personal to me. It was the processional hymn of my first installation as a deacon at Holy Child in St. Martin in Daly City. So,
And guess what I found out, John, as I've sorted stuff out? When I preached at the service for Winston Ching, you were one of the deacons at that service
oh, I was.
at St. John's. Do you remember?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I'm looking at the program. John Owens. Oh, I know John Owens.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was very involved being at Holy Child St. Martin. I was very involved with the Asian ministries.
Okay.
As a whole. So yeah. Yeah. So anybody else? Can you think of inadequacies or numbness or agitation that you can think of that maybe comes to mind?
I would say for me, just because I was kind of young and involved with stuff in the 60s and going through the years here, and then yes, people saying things and then they just kind of move on and put it aside and nothing happens. I would say from that though, I have hopes at this time, even though I am not, as most people know, I am not an internet person. I don't have a smartphone, but I think with these smartphones, with Facebook, etc., people are seeing things that they have never seen before, and so I think this is bringing new light to a lot of people. Some may turn it off, but some of them, it's hard to turn it off. It's on every station. It's in all these cities. I see high hopes. It's unfortunate that guns are involved in some places, but I see high hopes because of communication, whereas we didn't have that until pretty recently.
Yeah.
We still have to do something as individuals. I'm not saying it's going to do it itself. I'm just saying that this will help.
Right. Well, so I want to move to kind of the last question for tonight. And this again goes a little bit with what Fran was talking about, how she's been waiting for years of action. So here's the next question. So Waldo shares, he says, I simply began to realize that if I was going to be faithful to God's call to me as a reconciler, I couldn't just let the history lie there. I
Mhm.
had to be somebody who was going to be finding ways to heal, to repair, to reconnect. I have to shift course. I've got work to do. My inner sense of urgency to be about the conversation has just filled me in this place. He goes on to say, there's a part of me that thinks we need to get past just talking about race,
Mhm.
about justice. We need to live it.
Yep.
We need to bring our lives so deeply into that conversation that the objectification of that slavery is the ultimate expression of, is replaced by a complete I thou relationship.
Mhm.
You have gifts that God has given you that I've been blind to. The readiness of the church for the conversation, I think, starts with a good look in the mirror. Am I ready to tell my story that's painful, that's hopeful? Am I ready to hear your story that's painful, that's hopeful? I am ready to do that work. And so the question is, do you feel called to be a reconciler or a repairer of the breach? In what specific ways are God calling you to step forward to repair or to reconcile? How do you answer God's call or sustain dedication, determination, or do you even have a painful story?
I don't really have a painful story, but I have a lot of friends who happen to be Black, and two of them especially, both single females. And when all of this stuff was going on, I wanted to reach out to one of them and just say, you know, how you doing or something like that. And before I did, one of them posted something on Facebook, and it was beautiful. If I can find it, I'll share it with you, but I'll have to go digging. I don't know if I can find it anymore. But she said, don't call me and ask me how I'm doing.
Mhm.
I'm not in this. You know, I'm not part of one of those. And just because it's happening and I happen to be Black, don't, oh, how am I doing? Can I take you out to lunch? No, don't do that. Don't do that. So I didn't. We've been exchanging emails on other stuff that, you know, for, we all used to get together and have dinner once a month, and that's off now because of COVID. But I was surprised by that at first. And then I read everything that she said in there, and it was kind of eye-opening. Because I think of the two, one of them doesn't care. She's just who she is, and it doesn't matter. But the other one, I think, has had issues and problems, and she's the one with the son. And she's also the one who acts differently depending on who she's talking to,
Mhm.
that I've noticed. So, you know, she's surviving and weaving her way in and out of whatever her story is. And I don't think she doesn't want to talk about it.
Hmm.
So we don't talk about it. I mean, we did one time when she was telling me how she was so scared for her son when he was in high school. But that was it. So yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. Because how do you reach out to somebody who A, doesn't need it, or feel they don't need any, you know, I mean, I don't know. I've known them for many years, so it doesn't seem to be, I just wanted to make sure they were okay while all this was going on. But one was fine with that and the other one, no. And again, that's probably personality and their own personal experience. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's hard, especially when you want when you want to reach out. But I think that sometimes people might be in situations where if you when you go that extra mile, that some people want to be checked in with, but then some people want to feel like maybe they're being singled out and they want to be just treated the same as you've always treated them. And when you start acting, it's like, dude, you're acting weird. Why are you doing this? If you've had this ongoing relationship with them, and I don't know that I have any kind of easy answer to that, but I could kind of see where or how that might develop.
It's, I mean, every family is different. Every person is just different. Everybody's got their own pathway to where they are today that got them to who they are. And there's so many things that make you who you are, that it's hard to unravel all that. I mean, when you're talking about this issue, it's very blatant. It's still ongoing. There's still all of this, fighting and protesting. Although I think we've got agents in there that are stirring it up too. So that's not fair. And you have to cut that stuff out too. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I would have thought by now, most of the people who are alive today aren't from the beginnings of that. So how diluted has it been? Has it been diluted, or does it get stronger? I don't know. Depends on what your family story is.
I would say a lot of people stay the same. I mean, if you saw, I will just throw out, if you saw this, where it was one of the Trump rallies a few months ago, and they interviewed this woman, and of course she didn't have a mask on, nobody did. And they were interviewing her on a subject, and she said, I hate these people, and I'm a racist, and I'm going to make sure my grandchildren are racist also.
Mm-hmm.
It's a given. It's unfortunate, but some people, and if they do that, they concentrate that interest right down to their grandchildren that they're raising, perhaps. So it does keep going.
Yep.
It's hard to get rid of hate.
And that's, I hate to say this, but is hate stronger than love? Because love should be strong enough to conquer that. But if hate keeps going,
We would hope that love is stronger than hate.
yes, I believe so, but it depends on who you can reach. I know there was somebody that I knew many, many years ago who was attacked and raped, and it happened to be a Black man who did it. And from then on, she says, I hate all Black people.
Mm-hmm.
I said, why? The only thing that would make any sense to me here was that you hate all men.
Mm-hmm.
That your comment doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bad apple, bad guy, whatever. Okay, but why are you throwing that on everybody? That's not fair.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask a question. Do you think that we're going to make more progress in the church because our PB is African American?
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you, at least the conversations are alive. They're going.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is, what do you want to see? What does it look like? I think that's the real comprehension, is what has to happen in order for people to say this is the church is doing it, the work, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it's not simply just throwing out and mandating that everyone goes through anti-racism training, but you do have some honest things. Like I just saw an article the other day where the Diocese of Maryland decided to commit $1 million to reparations.
Mm-hmm. I saw that.
So the question is, what does it look like? What is it going to be to consider. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but what does it look like to say we've done the work? Is it until we are a completely integrated, diverse church? Does that does that say we've done the work, or does it mean we're going to spend X amount of dollars on reparations? Or I'm just throwing things out there. I just want to know. I mean, people talk about it, but it's this high conceptual thing, and I don't know what has to happen in order to say we've done this work.
Well, the PB in his opening address to the House of Bishops said that the bishop, I think of Utah, Scott Hayashi, said, we have to keep asking ourselves, not what would Jesus do, but what did Jesus do?
Mhm.
And if we keep that in front of us, that may give us a clue.
Right. I suspect that no matter what, it's always going to be ongoing work. It's never,
Of course.
you can never stop it. It's gonna, you're gonna, it's like developing a muscle. You're gonna have to continually work at it, and just keep bettering yourself.
Educate me here, because I think I'm missing something, which is, I grew up mostly in the Lutheran Church. And what I think I'm hearing is the Episcopal Church has work to do. Is that because there's always been an issue? Or, isn't every church?
All
got
the
it in an
churches have
issue?
work to do. No, all the churches have work
All
to do.
churches.
Okay,
But we talk about Episcopal because we're Episcopalian.
yeah, okay.
And many
Because-
Episcopalians were very wealthy and had lots of slaves.
Well,
They were very strong in Virginia.
Okay, that's the pieces I'm missing, because I'm like, I don't get it. It's a church, and I love this church because it is so outpouring and taking everyone in and does so much, charity work and all that kind of stuff.
And that's kind of the acknowledgement. What does the church as an institution look like, and how have we acknowledged our past? I'll give a couple of examples. My last diocese was the Diocese of Southeast Florida. And if you go to Key West, Florida, everyone goes there for a tourist, but there are 2 Episcopal churches in town. There is the popular one that's right there on the main strip, and beautiful. Well, that was the historic church of the affluent white people. And the other church was where the servants went to church. And so that's what they do. They drop their masters off, and then they would go on to their own church, and then they would come back. And so you can still see this distinguishment between the 2 churches today there in a community. Now, the African-American church is a very struggling parish, mission oriented, and you have this very heavily endowed, beautiful white church down the road. And so how and considering they're only a mile and a half apart, a mile apart, maybe you can walk it. Do you need 2 Episcopal churches? And so thinking about what does that look like? What does that look like in context? Or, what does it look like? I can tell you, before I came to the Bay Area, I was in Omaha, Nebraska, at Church of the Resurrection. And Church of the Resurrection, they call it Resurrection because it was 2 Episcopal parishes that came together that were on the verge of dying, and the resurrection was what they did, rose from their dying. And it was an all-white church with an all African-American church. That has been one of the few churches I've ever really attended that's been very well integrated. One race or the other. So that's a success story that they have in that parish right there. And I assume that's what all churches should look like. They should look diverse, and they should look, even just look at St. John's, for example. We're about a 90% white church, but if you look at even just the demographics of Montclair, well, we should have more Asians like Fran around.
Right, you should.
Demographically speaking, if you make up the makeup of our neighborhood, we're not the makeup of our neighborhood.
Okay, because if you have a white church and you have a black church, what goes on inside each one. Isn't it the same? Aren't they talking to the same guy? Isn't it all the same?
No,
What they're
different.
doing in
Yeah.
each one? But this
Well,
one
and-
can't go to that one. This one shouldn't go to that one.
and that's why we got to break down the barriers.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And,
but that makes no sense.
but breaking down the barriers is why we have to also acknowledge where we come from and not overplay our cultures. I mean again, that's why we have things like white privilege and things like that. Why we have to make ourselves conscious about that, because if I go into another congregation's culture, believe me, they know what white privilege looks like, but I may not know what that looks like. And so it's being able to check myself so I'm not taking advantage of my power per se, and really learning to embrace two cultures that really got to come together.
Yeah. I know when I was growing up, my best friend was Catholic. And we were like in third grade, jumping up and down on the bed or something. And she says, "You're going to go to hell. I'm going to go to heaven." I'm like, "What?" And she goes, "Yeah, because you're not Catholic and you can't come into my church." I mean, she was so strong in this. And then as we got older and everything, we were talking more about stuff. And she goes, "I don't know where I got that from." But then it became all the white churches, how many people in there were hypocrites? They'd sit in there all day, every Sunday, but when they left after church, they didn't follow anything that they were there for.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was all hypocritical. Then you'd see the big black churches where they're singing and that's real. The Baptist churches where they just belt it out. And my one friend, I told you, that's got the son and all, she sings in the chorus there. I mean, she can belt, and her daughter's a beautiful singer. But, I said, "Oh, I'd love to come and sing." "Well, you can come and see her right there, but you can't show up at our church." I'm like, okay. So, like I said, I just get so confused by the absurdity of it all. It makes no sense.
Well,
I get it, but it makes no sense to me.
We're about out of time. So I just want to remind you to join in for the third and final episode next week at 6:00. And with that, I'm going to ask Fran, would you be willing to close this in prayer?
Of course. Lord be with you.
And also with
So
you.
with
Also,
you.
you.
Come, Holy Spirit, come. Help each of us not only to understand what's going on, but to do something with what we understand. We're trying, but we need some help. And so we would pray that you, the Holy Spirit, you would endow each of us with grace upon grace so that we can not only be workers in the vineyard, but inspire other people to be workers in God's vineyard. And as we leave this discussion this night, we thank you for your presence among each of us, and we look forward to being together again. And we ask that you be with us and bless us as you always have. And all this we do pray in God's name and by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Have a good dinner. Yep. See you at the hymn sing tomorrow, right?
Yes,
Okay.
7
I don't
o'clock.
sing.
7:00. Yes. It's on my calendar. Okay.
Bye-bye.